Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be one of the hardest and I think most healing videos that I have ever filmed. I hope that by sharing my miscarriage story, it helps people who have went through a similar experience or are going through a similar experience not feel alone, because miscarriages are so common and no one really talks about them. And I know, especially for me, when I went through mine, it's a very isolating, lonely time, and I just want to share my story to let other women who are going through this know that you are not alone. If this is the first video of mine that you've watched, my name is Jessica. I have a 2, almost 3-year-old son, and my husband and I got pregnant with him right after we got married. We weren't even trying, it just was a pleasant surprise. So at the beginning of this year, around February, when our son turned 2, we decided to start trying for another baby. And I think just because of our experience getting pregnant so quickly when we weren't really trying to get pregnant, I was under the impression that it was going to happen for us right away, and that did not happen. It took us 9 months to conceive, and I know now that 9 months does not seem like a long time to some people. I know now that there are people who struggle for years to get pregnant, and like I said, I think I was just very naive going into trying to get pregnant, and I've learned so much since then. So we got pregnant after 9 months, and I found out when I was about 4 weeks pregnant based off the first day of my last period. In Florida, where we live, you can go in for your confirmation of pregnancy appointment as soon as you find out you're pregnant. I know that in some states you wait until, I think it's 8 weeks or something before you have your first appointment, but in Florida they schedule your appointment as soon as you find out that you're pregnant. So when I called my OB's office, they scheduled me for the next week when I was 5 weeks pregnant. So when we went for that appointment, they gave me a pregnancy test and confirmed that I was pregnant, and then we met with the doctor and went over all of the normal do's and don'ts of pregnancy. And then my doctor did a quick pelvic exam to see if my uterus had started to expand yet, because in pregnancy your uterus starts to expand and they can feel when that happens. He could not feel that happening with me yet, and that just meant that I was early along in my pregnancy. So they took a sample of blood to test my HCG levels, and then they scheduled me for my first ultrasound appointment for the next week when I would be 6 weeks pregnant. And they said that around 6 weeks is when you can see the baby and hear the heartbeat. And I remember with my first son, my first confirmation of pregnancy appointment, I was 6 weeks and we were able to see him and hear his heartbeat. So I was really looking forward to that next week's appointment. So that next week came and went, and my pregnancy symptoms were very minimal, especially compared to my first pregnancy. I had brought that up to the doctor in my first appointment, and he basically said that I'm a little too early to be experiencing any crazy symptoms, but even if I don't have the same symptoms as I did with my first, it's not any reason to be alarmed because every pregnancy is different. So basically the only symptoms I had was I would wake up in the morning really hungry, which I never really am hungry in the morning for breakfast. And I felt like if I didn't eat, I would feel a little nauseous. Not as nauseous as I was with my first pregnancy, but definitely my stomach wouldn't feel right unless I ate. And then I did feel some exhaustion, But as far as pregnancy symptoms, my boobs didn't hurt, I wasn't nauseous. It was night and day from my first pregnancy, so that was always something that was in the back of my mind. So when we went in for our 6-week appointment the following week, we went in the ultrasound room and they do the vaginal ultrasound, and right away I could tell on the screen that you couldn't see the baby yet. All you could see was, they said it was the yolk sac. It was just basically this little sac. And that's the only thing we could see on the screen. So we met with the doctor after the ultrasound appointment, and he basically said that one of two things is happening. One is that my cycle is off and our calculations were not correct, and I am not as far along as they thought. So instead of being 6 weeks, maybe I'm just 5 weeks. And he said that that actually matched what my HCG levels were measuring when they tested my blood. So he was pretty sure that my cycles were off and the dates were wrong, and that's why we weren't seeing the baby at this point, because I was not 6 weeks yet. He did talk to us about the possibility of miscarriage when you are this early along in your pregnancy, so that was kind of our worst case scenario. But he was very hopeful, since we were young and we have already had one healthy pregnancy, that my dates were just off and that the next week we should definitely be able to see the baby and hear the heartbeat. And we actually scheduled that next appointment for, it was like a week and 3 days out, because we wanted to just be extra sure that when we went in for that ultrasound, we wouldn't be freaking out, everything would be fine, and I would be far enough along to see what they wanted to see and to hear the heartbeat and all of that. The week before our second ultrasound, I started to feel the most exhausted that I had felt, and it really reminded me of my first pregnancy. So it gave me a lot of hope that everything was okay and that the baby was growing, and I was just getting drained from all of that. I didn't have any other pregnancy symptoms. I still felt great. I didn't feel nauseous, but I would every afternoon feel that like heavy exhaustion feeling that I remember getting a lot during the first trimester of my first pregnancy. So the day of my second ultrasound came, and that morning when I went to the bathroom, I wiped and there was a little spot. It was very little of brown, and I immediately Googled it, because that's just what I do when I'm pregnant. I Google every single thing. And from what I read, when you are around 6 weeks pregnant, it is very common to have some brown discharge. I don't remember exactly what is happening, something with the uterus that causes the brown discharge. So I felt pretty reassured when I read that, but I was happy that I was going in to the doctor that day, and I was definitely going to bring that up. So when we went in for my second ultrasound, when they believed I was 6 weeks, I was really excited. I mean, when you're pregnant, you're always excited for the ultrasound appointments. So my husband and I were really excited and really optimistic. We really didn't have much reason not to be. So we went back with the ultrasound tech, and they did the vaginal ultrasound, and this time you could see a lot more. You could see a little baby in there, but when she turned on the machine to hear the heartbeat, we couldn't hear anything. But she showed us on the screen that you could see a flickering that she said looked like the heartbeat, but she said that we just couldn't hear it because maybe I was not as far along again as they thought I was. And that was a little concerning to me, because our meeting with the doctor the week before was basically like, you need to hear the heartbeat this time and see the baby. I asked to talk to my doctor after that appointment, but he wasn't in the office that day because he was at the hospital on call the night before. So I met with the nurse together with the ultrasound tech. I mentioned that I was having the discharge. They said that that was normal and not to be worried. The only time that I need to be worried or call is if I saw bright red blood, which I had not. So they reassured me about the discharge, and they compared both ultrasounds, the one from the week before and the one that we just had, and they said that there was a significant amount of growth. Everything seemed to be on track and that I should not be concerned, and just to come back in 1 week and they were going to do another ultrasound, and they were very optimistic that there would be more growth and the baby would be big enough at that point to hear the heartbeat. So when we left the appointment and I got in the car, I kind of broke down, and I just did not feel right. Something in my gut just, I don't know, it just felt off. I think I was hoping so desperately to leave that appointment feeling reassured and relieved, because I have been carrying just some worry with me from every appointment that was just not quite normal, not quite on track. And I just felt like I had this cloud looming over me, and I hoped that appointment would just make it go away. And I basically would have to live with that same nervous fear for another week, and that was just really hard for me. But I pulled it together and I tried to just stay positive and think positive, and I knew that feeling stressed and worried was not going to help things. So I tried to just proceed as normal that week, and I continued to have just slight spotting, and it was always brown, so I really wasn't worried about it. I did not have any spotting with my first pregnancy, but I had stopped comparing my first pregnancy to this pregnancy because they were just night and day different. So I just threw everything out of the window and figured this pregnancy was going to be its own experience, so everything was completely new to me at this point. So the following day, I took a picture of our little ultrasound picture that we got where you could see the baby, and I posted it on Instagram. I had already shared on my social media accounts on YouTube. All of our friends and family, obviously, everyone already knew about our pregnancy, and I was just so excited to share this journey. Everything seemed to be happening at just the right time for us. So I went ahead and shared the picture of the ultrasound that we got because I was just really happy and really excited. And that evening, I remember I had just put my son to bed. It was around 7:30, 8 o'clock. I had the most searing pain shoot through my left pelvis, and it kind of continued, and it felt like a throbbing feeling that lasted pretty much the entire night. I remember laying down after that and just taking it easy. So the following day I woke up, I no longer had that pain, and I was going through the day, and it was right around dinner time. I went to the bathroom, and when I wiped, all I could see was red blood, bright red blood, which they said you do not want to see. So I just remember feeling shocked, and I was scared, and I just didn't know what to do. So my first reaction was to call my sister, who years before unfortunately had had a miscarriage. So I called her and I told her everything that had been happening, and she said that I needed to call my doctor and they were probably going to send me to the emergency room. At that point, I had already put my son to bed for the night. My husband was working hours away and he wouldn't be home for a long time. So I did not want to go to the emergency room. I was hoping that everything was just gonna stop and this was just gonna go away. So I got off the phone with my sister and I waited about 10 minutes. I went to the bathroom again and there was more red blood and I started to feel like I had period cramps. So I called my doctor. The OB office I go to has a lot of different doctors, and the one who happened to be on call was the same doctor that delivered my son. So when she called me back and she said her name, and I recognized her obviously right away, and she said, "What's going on?" I broke down. Like I don't know why. I was so scared and I just lost it, and it took me a couple minutes to be able to even tell her what was going on. I told her all of the backstory. So when I finally pulled it together enough to explain what was going on to her, she told me that seeing red blood was something that you never want to see in pregnancy. She said it is a small possibility that it could be something besides a miscarriage, but the most probable thing that was happening was a miscarriage. And that was obviously really hard to hear, even though that was my biggest fear of what was happening. I asked her if I needed to go to the emergency room or if there was something that I needed to do, and she told me that unless I was soaking through pads, that there's no reason for me to go and sit for hours in the emergency room. She said that to wear pads, not tampons, because your cervix is a little bit dilated. So something about using tampons could cause an infection. Of course, I don't use pads. I only had tampons at my house. I was home by myself. My son was asleep, so I wasn't gonna wake him up to go to the store. And I felt like I was like experiencing an out-of-body experience. So much of what was happening to me that night, I feel like I don't really remember going through. I was just in such shock. So I got off the phone with her. She said to make an appointment with her office the next business day, and they would do an ultrasound and find out what was going on. So at that point, all I had were my son's diapers that I put in my underwear, and I got in bed and the cramps started coming on so strong. They reminded me a lot of contractions, which I've read since then is basically what happens when you are having a miscarriage. Your body is contracting to basically get rid of everything that is in there. And that night was the longest and hardest, loneliest night of my entire life. It was painful physically, emotionally. I was in shock trying to process that this was real and that this was happening to me, and I didn't understand what was happening or why. And it was just the worst night of my entire life. I drifted in and out of sleep that night, and every time I went in the bathroom, it was horrible. There was so much blood and there was a lot of clotting, which is normal for miscarriages. I was shaking all night. I just wasn't myself. Like, I was not in the right state of mind, my normal state of mind. I was just going through the motions. It's the best way I guess I could describe it. When we went in for the ultrasound appointment the following day, I felt like I was a shell of a person. I was scared. I didn't want to go because I knew what they were going to say. I was just going through the motions. Like, for days after my miscarriage happened, I felt like I was just like a zombie going through the motions. So when we went in, we immediately were brought into the ultrasound room, and I was still bleeding pretty heavily at that point. I had my husband pick up for me extra large overnight pads, which I felt like I was wearing a diaper, but that they were necessary. So we went in for the ultrasound. When we looked at the screen, there was nothing there, and it was heartbreaking, even though I knew going into that appointment that the chances of the baby not being there and being okay were slim, but to have that confirmation in front of you and to see it was heart-shattering for me. After the ultrasound, I had to go in for an exam, and it was the most painful exam. I did not need to get a DNC or anything like that. She did have to pull something out, she said, during the exam, which was so painful. I think the exam lasted 5 minutes, but it felt like it was an hour of excruciating pain. Basically, she said that I would probably bleed a little bit longer than a normal period, and then it would stop, and she expected the next month for my period to be back to normal. Then I went home after that appointment. I had terrible cramps for the rest of the day. I was so mentally and physically exhausted that I just got in bed and went to sleep and tried to sleep through the pain. This type of loss is something that you cannot mentally prepare yourself for, and it has been and continues to be very hard to wrap my mind around. From the minute that I took that pregnancy test and I saw that I was pregnant, I loved this baby. I wanted this baby. I was planning our future and seeing our future with this baby. So it is extremely devastating to one day just have that all go away. And that's something that I still struggle with right now. I'm constantly reminding myself that certain things that I have planned for are no longer happening. I do not regret sharing with our family and friends for the minute we found out we were pregnant and celebrating this baby and this life that we were expecting to bring into the world. I don't think that any mother who has gone through a miscarriage ever stops thinking about that baby and what their life would be, what that baby would be like. I think that that is completely normal, and I want to honor the memory of this baby and the life that this baby had, because this was a life, this was a baby, and it was a short life, but it was one that we were so happy about, and a baby that we were so hopeful that we were going to have be a part of our lives. And I don't understand why that didn't happen for us, but I will never forget this baby. I will always have this experience, and I feel so fortunate to have connected with so many other women who have survived this experience and shared it with me in hopes of helping me heal and move forward. And if I can, in my own way, do that for somebody else, I think that's amazing. And I don't want to feel like I have to hide this experience or pretend it didn't happen or pretend that it wasn't absolutely earth-shattering, because it is all those things, and it's okay to feel all those things, and you're not alone. It's so healing to share my story and just to be able to talk about it and have others feel like they can reach out to me with questions and things that maybe they're dealing with. And I might not have all the answers, but sometimes it helps to just talk to someone who has been through it, or hear someone's story who has been through it. To me, that has been so helpful on my journey to moving forward and healing from this experience. So I hope that this video is able to help somebody, even in a little way, or if nothing else, just let you know that this experience is extremely common. It is entirely devastating, and you have every single right to grieve the way that you need to in order to move forward. So I am going to go ahead and end this video here. Thank you so much for watching. If you have gone through this experience, know that you are not alone, and I will see you guys in my next video.
Stay true to that fire in your heart and your soul. Don't drench your desire in what you can't control. We fly, try so hard to get there, and we might be lost but not forever.